Hey there everyone, and welcome back to the channel. What we're talking about today might feel far-fetched, but it's a reality that is played out in different places and times in history. Martial law is when civilian government is pushed aside and military control takes over, bringing curfews, checkpoints, and restrictions on movement, speech, and everyday freedoms. While most people do not expect to experience it, recognizing the warning signs can help you stay ahead of major disruptions and prepare in a calm, practical way. In this video, we will go over key developments that often appear before martial law is declared. I will also share practical ways to stay informed, protect your freedoms, and avoid being caught off guard if things escalate. The goal is not to cause fear, but to encourage awareness and readiness, so you can keep a clear head in uncertain times. By the end, you will have a better understanding of what is just media hype and what could be a real warning sign, giving you the ability to navigate these situations with confidence. If you are new here and find this content helpful, make sure to subscribe, share this video with others, and join the conversation in the comments. Building knowledge and preparedness as a community is always better than trying to face difficult times alone. Let's start by talking about something that often slips under the radar until it becomes too loud to ignore, and that is the tone and style of official government communication. When martial law is on the horizon, we tend to see consistent, intense messaging about threats to national stability or social order, with repeated phrases about how extraordinary measures might be necessary to keep everyone safe. You'll often hear leaders talking about unprecedented times, existential dangers, and the urgent need for a united front against forces that threaten our very way of life. While this might not automatically mean martial law is next, it can be a stepping stone if it escalates and authorities keep emphasizing the need for drastic interventions, especially when they paint entire groups of people as villains to be neutralized. When that happens, it can heighten tensions, erode trust in various communities, and create an environment where the public becomes more open, or at least more resigned, to top-down control in the name of stability or national security. On a day-to-day level, this shift in rhetoric might appear subtle, like your local or national news channels echoing a single narrative about why certain cities need special policing, or why certain freedoms have to be temporarily set aside. You might notice official press releases that call for firm responses, blame specific organizations for widespread troubles, and instill a sense of urgency that encourages the public to demand action. Over time, this can morph into open declarations that only a stronger hand can steer the country through its rough waters. While this could be a genuine reaction to real dangers, history has shown that this heightened tone can pave the way for crackdowns that suspend everyday rights. A good approach in these moments is to gather your information from more than one source instead of latching onto a single news outlet. In a world of echo chambers, you want to triangulate the truth by checking local reports, independent journalists, and, if possible, friends or contacts in other regions who might have a clearer perspective on events. It's also a good idea to keep an archive of important press conferences or statements you've seen, especially if you sense the narrative is shifting from measured caution to aggressive condemnation. Notice the progression of language. Do the announcements keep returning to words like emergency, clampdown, zero tolerance, or total control? Or is it more of a balanced approach to dealing with unrest or crises? Being an attentive listener doesn't mean you automatically assume the worst. Rather, you monitor the tone for any abrupt or extreme shifts. If you do pick up on a clear pattern of mounting authoritarian language, you can make decisions about whether to travel, relocate, or quietly strengthen your home preparedness. Sometimes the earliest sign of martial law's approach isn't an army in the streets, but a drumbeat of official statements preparing the public to accept that possibility. Another strong sign that points toward the possibility of martial law is the increasing militarization of your local police forces. This goes beyond them carrying more advanced firearms and shows up in the acquisition of armored vehicles, high-tech surveillance gear, and tactics more suited to a battlefield than community policing. You might see police parading equipment like sound cannons, flashbang grenades, or heavily armored carriers in situations where you would expect routine crowd control. A significant red flag is when these militarized elements become the norm rather than the exception, indicating that law enforcement is gearing up for large-scale operations involving citywide checkpoints, forced lockdowns, or similar measures. Visual changes are often the first clue, like seeing patrols wearing full tactical gear on ordinary days or responding to minor infractions with overwhelming force. It might be explained as a crime deterrent or an anti-terror measure, but if it starts blending with political messaging about subversive groups, or if you notice a pattern of expanding powers to search homes without warrants, that's a hint that the line between regular policing and martial enforcement is getting blurred. This is especially concerning when there is close cooperation between military forces and local police, potentially indicating that separate command structures are being unified so that, in a declared emergency, orders can flow in a straight line from the top without typical civilian oversight. If you start seeing these trends, one practical approach is to learn your local geography well enough to know alternative routes that might keep you away from heavily patrolled zones, either because you need to get to work without being stopped repeatedly, or because you want to avoid unpredictable encounters. It's also wise to remain polite and measured if you do get questioned or stopped. As much as you might disagree with heavy-handed tactics, escalating a confrontation on the spot usually results in more trouble than it's worth. You can quietly document incidents if it's legally permissible, though you should be aware that even filming law enforcement in public can be frowned upon in places leaning toward harsher control. If you suspect a real pivot toward martial law is underway, maintaining situational awareness is key. That means taking note of how often large teams are deployed, what types of vehicles are used, and whether your local officials issue statements that normalize high levels of force in day-to-day policing. By keeping track of these patterns, you can anticipate potential checkpoints or closures and plan your necessary errands or commutes during times or along routes that minimize friction. In times when tensions run high, the everyday routine can become complicated, but staying calm and informed can make a world of difference for you and those around you, especially if you share helpful updates through local community channels in a discreet and responsible manner. It may look routine on the surface when you hear about big training drills, but large-scale exercises that coordinate police, military, and other government agencies in urban environments can foreshadow a readiness to impose tighter controls or even martial law down the line. This is particularly true if these exercises focus on crowd management, evacuation protocols, or search and seizure operations within civilian neighborhoods. Officially, the exercises might be described as anti-terror drills or disaster response simulations, but you'll know something is off if they happen frequently, involve massive troop movements, and are cloaked in secrecy, with limited information provided to the public or to local government bodies that would normally be in the loop. These training events can serve multiple purposes. They give soldiers and heavily armed police units a chance to familiarize themselves with city layouts, test out communications gear, and practice setting up checkpoints. While legitimate training is necessary for disaster preparedness or crises like major storms, a repeated focus on controlling large crowds, searching residential areas without standard warrants, or detaining large groups can be a harbinger of how a martial law scenario might unfold. In some historical examples, these operations have included setting up mock detention facilities in stadiums or convention centers with entire blocks shut down, so the units can rehearse moving swiftly through city streets. If you ever hear about or witness these exercises in your area, pay attention to the details, like whether the local government is transparent about when and where the drills will take place, or if these announcements appear last minute, leaving the community in the dark. Look for patterns in the type of equipment being transported in, as well as whether roads and highways are unexpectedly closed without a clear reason. In many cases, it's wise to note alternative routes in and out of your neighborhood, especially if your usual freeway exit is blocked by a simulated checkpoint. You might also want to be prepared for disruptions to public transport, cellular networks, or internet service, because comprehensive drills sometimes test how quickly those can be shut down. Another angle is community networking, since people living near training sites often share real-time information about unusual movements, like helicopters circling at odd hours or large convoys rolling in after dark. By staying attuned to those details, you can better gauge whether these are just short-lived exercises or part of a broader pattern of readiness for heavy-handed control. This doesn't mean you should jump to conclusions every time your city's National Guard does a practice run. But if multiple signs are adding up, from increasingly intense rhetoric to militarized policing and frequent citywide drills, you might think about reinforcing your personal preparedness. This can range from having a more organized stock of supplies at home to planning family meetup points if travel restrictions or curfews are announced without warning. One of the biggest day-to-day stressors that can alert you to an approaching martial law situation, or at least a serious breakdown of regular order, is the interruption of the supply chain. When the flow of essential goods stalls, especially on a wide scale, there can be a number of causes, from natural disasters to economic crises. But if these disruptions correlate with heightened government or military activity, it could signal a deliberate effort to control resources in order to manage or pressure the population during a crisis. You might notice this in your local grocery store or pharmacy when shelves that are usually stocked suddenly sit empty. It might start small, like just one product line or a few perishable items, then spread to other categories such as cleaning supplies, medications, or even fuel at gas stations. Some official explanations might blame it on logistical hiccups or a temporary closure of certain routes, and those can be perfectly valid reasons. But if the shortfalls last longer than expected, or happen alongside statements from authorities saying they have to ration goods to maintain security, that's a clue that something bigger might be unfolding. In situations like these, it helps to have some basics stored up gradually over time so you don't suddenly have to clear out a store in one panicked shopping spree, which tends to draw attention and can empty your wallet. If you set aside extra non-perishable food or water purification options and keep them organized at home, you'll be in a better position to stay calm when certain items become scarce or overpriced. Another approach is finding local sources for produce or protein, such as farmers markets or community gardens. Because if the official distribution network tightens or gets disrupted, smaller, more direct connections can help you acquire fresh items that you might not find elsewhere. You also want to be aware of your neighbors and local community, because open communication can reveal when a shortage in one part of town might be less severe in another, letting people help each other by coordinating small group trips or exchanging resources. Also, if the government imposes limits on how much you can buy, that could be a test to see how the public reacts to partial restrictions. At that point, you could see ration cards or official distribution centers that require citizens to line up and register for basic goods, a process that can quickly erode a sense of normalcy and give authorities a grip on who gets what and when. By spotting these changes early, you can take quiet, prudent steps to ensure your household has what it needs, rather than waiting until everyone's scrambling in the middle of a declared emergency. Another strong indicator that your community might be spiraling toward martial law is the implementation of mandatory curfews. These are typically introduced during times of unrest or natural disasters, but they can be extended or expanded as a means of broader control if the government claims it's necessary to restore order. What might begin as a narrowly targeted curfew for one troubled district can easily spread citywide if leaders believe, or want you to believe, that a serious threat looms everywhere after dark. In practical terms, curfews can escalate quickly from modest timeframes like midnight to 5 in the morning, intended to curb late-night gatherings, to much stricter rules that start at sunset, or even earlier. You might see announcements that group gatherings after curfew will be met with arrests or fines, and you'll notice an uptick in security checkpoints, with law enforcement or even military personnel patrolling the streets to ensure compliance. If you're out for a legitimate reason, such as working a night shift, it might become necessary to carry documents proving that you're authorized to be out. But in more ominous scenarios, you could still be detained for questioning if they decide your paperwork isn't in order. A wise strategy when curfews come into play is to prepare for the possibility of extended housebound hours, meaning you need enough food, medicine, and other essentials to last a stretch of time in case you can't get to the store. You'd also want to ensure you have things like flashlights or alternative power sources if rolling blackouts accompany the restrictions. If you live in a multi-person household or have a close group of neighbors, it can help to coordinate supply runs during the allowed hours, so you're not all making separate trips and risking run-ins with tense security personnel. Pay attention to how the curfew is enforced, because the method used can give you a window into the broader intentions of the authorities. If enforcement comes with heavily armed patrols that block major streets, shine floodlights into residential windows, or deploy drones to scan for people outside, it's arguably more than a simple attempt to keep the peace. It might be a way to get the public accustomed to seeing uniformed figures with sweeping powers, which fits neatly into a martial law framework. Ultimately, while curfews sometimes show up in short bursts for public safety, if they become regular, widespread, and aggressively enforced, you're looking at a condition where everyday freedoms are already significantly curtailed, setting the stage for more extreme measures. In many places around the world, one of the most controversial aspects of moving toward martial law is an effort to disarm the populace. Attempts to confiscate firearms often signal that the government is concerned about potential resistance, whether that resistance is real or perceived. So, new laws might pop up, mandating gun owners to register their weapons or limiting what types of firearms and ammunition they can possess. While some regulations might be routine, a scenario that stands out is rapid, sweeping legislation combined with door-to-door checks under the banner of public safety. You might see buyback programs advertised as a way for citizens to turn in weapons for cash or vouchers, followed by an increasingly aggressive stance toward anyone who doesn't comply quickly. Or you might hear about local law enforcement accompanied by federal or military agents going through neighborhoods, conducting so-called safety inspections, and asking questions about who owns what. If the rhetoric around these moves is fierce, talking about stamping out illegal guns by any means necessary, or painting all unregistered owners as criminals, this can be a significant warning that the state wants a populace less capable of armed pushback. Whether you support or oppose broader gun control, it's wise to grasp the historical context. In several instances where martial law was instituted, forced disarmament went hand in hand with the clampdown, because it's far easier to lock down areas, enforce curfews, and quell uprisings if the general population has diminished capacity to resist. If you're a legal firearm owner in a place where new restrictions show up suddenly, it's important to stay abreast of the actual laws to ensure you're not inadvertently violating them, because authorities may seize that opportunity to confiscate weapons on technicalities. People have found it useful to keep documentation in a safe place and maintain a respectful stance if questioned, knowing that openly challenging armed officers might escalate the situation. However, firearms aren't the only means of personal safety. There are options like pepper spray, stun devices, or simply fortifying your home with better locks, layered security, and a community watch system. In some situations, you might even consider non-lethal deterrence and conflict de-escalation skills as a complement to your overall preparation, because part of surviving a tense environment is avoiding the kind of confrontation that could lead to severe crackdowns. Ultimately, if confiscations ramp up parallel to the other signs we've discussed, such as curfews or large-scale drills, it's wise to take note, because disarmament can smooth the path for a transition from ordinary law enforcement to direct military oversight. Another sign that martial law could be lurking on the horizon is a dramatic increase in surveillance measures, including things like expanded camera networks in public spaces, license plate readers that track vehicles as they move through the city, facial recognition tools that scan crowds at major intersections, or even drones sweeping over neighborhoods and gathering data. Governments often explain these methods as crucial to the fight against crime or terrorism, but it's worth noting how quickly such technology can be repurposed to monitor innocent people, map out personal networks, and identify potential dissidents before they organize or protest. If you live in a place where you notice these surveillance tactics ramping up, you might see an official rollout of new technology, accompanied by statements praising its accuracy and necessity. You might hear about new data retention policies that allow agencies to store phone records, social media posts, or browsing histories far longer than before, usually framed as beneficial for national security investigations. Meanwhile, certain regions adopt laws or emergency decrees that give the government the power to switch off or throttle internet access in times of crisis, effectively creating an internet kill switch. When combined, these measures allow a regime to track people's movement, observe their communications, and cut off their ability to share real-time footage or organize online if it feels threatened. To navigate these shifts, many individuals choose to learn more secure communication practices. That might mean using messaging platforms with strong encryption limiting how much personal information is shared publicly, and staying aware that even those platforms can be vulnerable depending on the local laws or the power of state-level surveillance. Some go a step further by reverting to older methods of contact, such as shortwave radio or in-person meetings that can't be easily recorded digitally. It's also not uncommon for folks to get sloppy with their own security, posting private details on social media, or leaving critical files in shared folders, which can become a goldmine for authorities if the clampdown intensifies. So a bit of housekeeping on your devices and accounts can be beneficial, even if you're not particularly worried about martial law. In short, a leap in surveillance capabilities can help pave the way for more direct forms of control. Once the infrastructure is in place, and people are accustomed to seeing cameras on every corner or drones overhead, it becomes much easier for the government to justify using all that tech to enforce curfews, restrict movement, or rapidly identify who's protesting or ignoring new directives. When you see digital oversight ramp up in tandem with other signs, such as militarized policing or enforced curfews, that's an especially compelling reason to keep your ear to the ground and your personal data under wraps. Mass demonstrations, protests, or waves of public discontent can either be a direct catalyst for martial law if the government chooses to label that unrest as an existential threat, or they can be used as a convenient excuse for leaders to crack down. We've seen it in history. Legitimate grievances like severe economic crises, mass unemployment, or allegations of electoral fraud lead people into the streets. And if those protests become large enough to disrupt daily life, authorities might respond aggressively, turning a volatile situation into one where the use of military power is justified as restoring the peace. When you live in a region where tensions are already high, perhaps there's a deep divide in political opinions or dramatic inflation is creating hardships, an outbreak of protests can escalate quickly into clashes with law enforcement. This escalation, if violent, often gets portrayed by state media as proof that society is teetering on chaos. That's when emergency powers come into play, starting with curfews, protest bans, or mass arrests, which can lay the groundwork for more authoritarian control if the tension doesn't die down. Authorities might also blame shadowy outside forces for fueling the unrest, thereby framing themselves as protectors against an imminent breakdown. And that narrative helps garner public support for tough measures. One way to navigate periods of unrest is to stay informed about demonstration sites, road closures, or hotspots of conflict. It's not always possible to avoid these areas, especially if they're near your home or workplace. But knowing the situation allows you to make calculated decisions on travel or safety precautions. Some people choose to participate in protests, guided by their convictions, while others opt to remain out of the fray to reduce personal risk. Whichever path you choose, it's prudent to have a plan for communicating with loved ones if cell coverage becomes overloaded or shut down, and to know a safe place to meet if things go sideways in the city center. Another dimension is your preparedness at home. In times of civil strife, supply lines can be disrupted, and city services might grind to a halt. So having a backup for basic utilities and a bit of extra storage for food, toiletries, and medications is far from paranoid. If the unrest keeps spreading, you could see local authorities implement partial states of emergency that bit by bit start looking like martial law, with the potential to overshadow normal life indefinitely. By keeping a clear head, you avoid getting blindsided if that pivot occurs, because you've already considered how to maintain some stability in your personal life. Having that personal plan makes it less likely you'll get caught up in the storm of panic if or when the government moves in with a heavier hand. Another important element that can quietly facilitate the imposition of martial law is when key government officials begin sidestepping checks and balances. So what once were robust democratic procedures or transparent accountability measures start falling by the wayside, replaced by murky executive orders, rushed legislation, or the removal of high-ranking individuals who dare to question the emerging power structure. In many systems, the presence of an independent judiciary, a somewhat balanced legislature, and active media ensures that no single entity can easily override the rule of law. But when those pillars are systematically undermined, judges replaced, lawmakers silenced, journalists arrested, it's a sign that a significant centralization of power is taking place, which, in times of crisis, often accelerates into full-blown control. A clear indicator is when corruption investigations get stonewalled, or whistleblowers vanish overnight, and journalists who used to uncover uncomfortable truths suddenly find themselves declared enemies of the state, labeled traitors, or threatened with legal action for revealing sensitive information. You might also see a reshuffling of leadership within military or policing bodies, with the appointment of officials who have a track record of unwavering loyalty to the top brass rather than a history of professional competence or independence. These changes set the stage for quick mobilization, under a singular command removing any meaningful dissent from within the ranks. For everyday observers, you might notice that public discourse becomes heavily controlled press briefings, start sounding identical spokespeople, echo the same party lines without the usual pushback from journalists and local officials who traditionally had autonomy, like governors or mayors, suddenly conform to a centralized script or lose their positions. If a community tries to protest these developments, the clampdown might be swift. This might not be official martial law in name yet, but if the highest officials wield near absolute power, and no one within the government can challenge decisions, the formal declaration of martial law, should an incident trigger it, is just a step away. In this environment, the best thing you can do is stay politically aware, share accurate information within your trusted circles, and support those trying to hold the system accountable. Keep records of any suspicious ousters or public statements that signal someone was removed from office for spurious reasons. Watch for legislative moves that centralize power in the executive branch without the typical committee reviews. Consider participating in local civic events while it's still possible, or quietly back independent watchdog groups if you believe they're genuinely trying to preserve democratic norms. Because once the process of accountability has been hollowed out, the momentum for imposing sweeping emergency powers often faces little real opposition, and that's how martial law can be enacted smoothly, catching large segments of the public off guard when it happens. That brings us to the closing of our discussion on recognizing the potential signs of martial law, and I appreciate you hanging in there with me to examine these warning lights that can appear one by one or all at once, because history has shown that martial law doesn't just come crashing down out of a clear blue sky. It's usually preceded by subtle and not so subtle changes, from ramped-up government rhetoric to heightened surveillance, militarized policing, eroded civil liberties, mandatory curfews, and attempts to disarm citizens, not to mention large-scale drills that appear innocuous at first. While some of these developments can occur for legitimate reasons, the key is to observe the bigger picture and see if there's a confluence of events that points toward the serious possibility of martial law being declared in the near future. The main takeaway isn't about living in a constant state of fear, because that would be exhausting, and in many cases, conditions will stabilize without ever reaching the point of an all-out military takeover. Instead, I hope you'll walk away feeling more aware, more prepared, and less vulnerable to panic should any of these trends escalate in your region. By keeping a clear head, paying attention to local and reliable sources, and making modest preparations for potential disruptions, you can put yourself and your loved ones on steadier ground, so that even if martial law never materializes, you're still better equipped to handle power outages, food shortages, or civil unrest. If you found this exploration valuable, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, share this video with people you trust, and check back for more content aimed at strengthening everyday resilience and resourcefulness. Even small steps can make a huge difference when you're dealing with unpredictable circumstances. Whether it's learning basic first aid, establishing better communication plans with family, or just staying more informed about local happenings before they escalate. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. And remember that while we can't always dictate the challenges that come our way, we do have the power to respond calmly, ethically, and thoughtfully in the face of uncertainty. Stay prepared, stay connected, and we'll see you again next time.